Hey, good evening. Much appreciated. Great to see everybody tonight. What a great venue, and it's a pleasure to be here. You know, as a psychologist embedded in cardiology for the last 29 years, I've had an exceptional privileged window into heart patients' hearts and their minds. That gives you some ideas about how to live life, because heart patients are pretty interesting folks. That's so they tell me. But tonight what I want to do is share with you, what do you learn when you sit down with patients and people like yourselves? What do you learn over 29 years? What do they teach you about what matters in life? How do you find the heart and soul? I'll call it the inner thoughts for the outer banks tonight, all right? Because right here in cardiology, we do get a chance to see what's inside you, what makes you tick. And this idea about when psychologists often see you, sometimes I see people on the worst day of their life. Think about the worst day of your life. It's kind of a depressing idea. But psychologists are there in order to help you get through those, to understand what happened, to make sense of the past and forward yourself into the future. I mean, what we get up and do to work with you, everybody at this table who's in cardiac rehab, it's hollowed ground, man. We get people make a comeback. Like, look at this tattoo. I love this. From struggle comes strength. Don't you want a job like that? Don't you want a job where you get a chance to see people encounter the worst day of their life and power through it? Freaking awesome. It's awesome. We get to do it all the time because of you. We get to see what it takes inside you to make it through the worst days of your life. So what I want to do tonight is share with you, what do we know about all this? My goal with you tonight, my half hour with you or so, is find one new thing tonight. I want everybody in the room to find one thing that we talk about tonight that you go, okay, I got that tonight. So you got a challenge tonight. You got to find one thing from this talk that makes some sense to you. So what I'll do is talk about some themes. You know, what have I learned? And then we'll talk about some of the lessons that we got to do to get better, to feel strong, to find those comeback moments. Find a way to encounter the worst stuff in your life and get through it. So we'll start with some themes from practice. This comes from Captain Obvious. Heart events shake people up. Disease has a way of humbling us. Disease has a way of breaking in and stealing from us. Heart disease, more than any other in my view, lungs are real close though. They take away something that matters from you, to you. They take away that ability to do whatever you want to do, and it starts these fears about the future and your worries about your family. And when you look at the data about heart patients, these large meta-analyses, about a third of all heart patients end up encountering depression and anxiety that's substantial. So 1 out of 3 people, that worst day hangs around. And in terms of stress, 1 out of 2, that stress hangs around. So that's problematic, right? Because it means that this isn't just one thing, it's multiple things. Heart disease is not just worrying about your heart, but it's also worrying about some other things. This is a study hot off the press. Came out about 2 weeks ago. This is one of the most humbling slides I've ever seen. Because in this slide here, you can see that across the bottom is the percent of participants who are distressed about it, reported that it was moderately or severely distressing. And you'll see the number one thing that patients with heart failure said that was the most distressing to them was not knowing how my family will cope if something happens to me. Number 2, becoming a burden to my family. And then down here, avoid activities that make my heart beat faster. It's not about heart disease, is it? It's about families. It's about life. It's about being able to do. And it's about how this disease tries to break in and take everything that you love. Everything that you love. And this idea here about how we help people overcome this, being afraid of dying. Look at some of these things here, worrying that it'll come back at you. But in particular, avoiding things and somehow bugging out, withdrawing, disengaging. Disengaging. You know what the opposite of disengaging is? Cardiac rehab. That was for you guys. They gave me an extra brownie, so I have to cite them every now and then because they might take it back. I mean, I don't know that you want to get this t-shirt. They might sell this out front. I don't know. Heart failure, terrible, wouldn't recommend it. You know, Jeanette's Pure, 5 stars. Or what about this one? Nice try, heart, I'm still here. Now that's a little bit of a swaggy one, right? You know, you wear that one into cardiac rehab, you get some looks. Or this one, right? The beat goes on, an open heart warrior, right? Overcoming, being proud of the challenges, being proud of the ways that you take on adversity. That's what it's all about, and that's what we're going to keep talking about tonight, because that's what I think more than anything heart patients can teach us. More than anything, heart patients tell us about a special knowledge that when everything you've got's on the line, you love it more. When everything you've got might be lost, it matters more. That's special knowledge. That's what everybody else doesn't get. The rest of the world's walking around mindless. They don't have any idea what it's like to realize, wow, I'm really grateful to be here right now. This special knowledge is something I've become really interested in. This is an older study, but what this study did was follow cancer patients out and heart patients out about 6 years and then 10 years. And in this study, they wanted to know, hey, now that your 6 years passed and then 10 years passed, they asked them both at different time points, hey, what did cancer do to you? What did heart disease do to you? And this study is really interesting because when you look at it, you have breast cancer patients and heart attack patients, and look, the number one thing that heart patients reported as a positive effect 6 years later was healthy lifestyle change. Cool. But look at what number 2 was. Greater appreciation of health and life. More so than breast cancer. I mean, it's not really a race or anything. It's not like you want to beat the breast cancer patients. It's just, hey, you beat them. But the idea here is that, right? But look at breast cancer patients reported better empathy. But I think this is a really important idea. Because I think it's the strand of evidence that greater appreciation of health and life can be achieved in the course of your worst possible day. That maybe it just makes you a little bit more thankful. That gratitude for what you have, maybe it's just a little bit higher than it was before. But this concept of living with threat, this concept in these workers building skyscrapers without safety harnesses, right? OSHA would get after them. But the idea here is, these gentlemen got used to a little bit of threat, but they carried on anyway. They carried on anyway, and maybe they carried on with a trusty cardiac rehab professional nearby, but they carried on anyway, and they got the work done. And this is a recent soccer player. I don't know how many of y'all are, world soccer players. This guy, Tom Lockyer, actually had a cardiac arrest in the elite Premier Soccer League this past fall. This was from this week actually, where he's showing off his defibrillator, but he calls it his new superpower. See, I think that your greater appreciation for life can be your superpower. I think it can teach you what you love more than what other people know. And the third major theme I want to share with you is the idea that coping matters. That nobody came here tonight and goes, hey, I don't know how to cope. I hope he teaches me that tonight. But we're only looking for one new thing tonight. We're looking for one new thing that changes the way that you make sense of things. Now, the problem with coping is that avoidance of problems does provide short-term relief. If you just disengage like that data and just said, hey, I'm not going to do stuff because I'm going to try to nurse my heart, temporarily you might feel okay. But the problem is the strategic confrontation is really what has to happen if we want to get through these things in life. Because it's not just the stress that causes distress. Stress is the challenge. Being able to manage it and confront it reduces the distress. So a lot of people say, what's the secret? What's the secret to coping? People ask me this all the time, right? My whole life's been focused on how people cope with stuff that happens to them. But the truth is there isn't a secret to coping. That when we look at coping and we do large studies of hundreds of thousands of people trying to cope with the things that happen in their life, they consistently highlight the fact that it's not a single type of coping strategy, but the ability to do different kinds of things, to essentially be able to do what the Serenity Prayer says, right? So God, help me to have the serenity to accept the things that I can't. God, help me to have the courage to get after it and get some stuff done, like in cardiac rehab. But importantly, the wisdom to know the difference, to know that there's some things you've got to grieve. Grieving ain't sexy. Ain't nobody want to show up and say, hey, today's the day I can't wait to grieve. On the other hand, I'm not sure they always show up and say, hey, let's go over here and sweat a whole bunch in cardiac rehab. They're nice and everything, but it's still hard work. And so I think part of how psychologists help people dealing with heart disease and managing it is help them to understand that you'll need strategies for both. That you'll need strategies to be able to say, yeah, someone broke in and stole some of your health. When you weren't looking, someone broke in. And there's some things we can replace, but not everything. And if you keep trying to keep those piles separate, that helps you cope. And so, this idea of things we need to get after to solve the problem, we call it problem-focused coping or emotion-focused coping. Because in the end of the day, what we're trying to do is create what I'll call a cardiac comeback. That the goal of our work tonight, the goal of the work in cardiac rehab is to create the comeback. I consider it one of the most beautiful things humans can do. I think empathy and kindness. But individually, the idea of being able to make a comeback, to encounter your fears and confront them and move through them. And we do that. This is where I work at East Carolina. This is our thing. Making cardiac comebacks is our thing. This is what our whole situation's focused on. That we're focused on the idea that many of patients who come through with heart problems are going to report anxiety, and a large number of them are going to try to do everything they can to avoid exertion. So we've got to restore confidence and activity. And so our vision as we work on these comebacks is to empower our patients to be the most confident and active patients in the world. That's why we're here tonight. While it is a beautiful setting, Jen and Outer Banks wanted you to be more confident from coming here tonight. They wanted you to learn things, but they wanted you at the end of the day to recognize how much they value you and that continue to go forward. So, some of you may recognize this guy. I want to let him tell us about his cardiac rehab.
I remember when I had my open heart surgery, the third one, which was just a few years ago, just before we started Terminator 6. And I was like really freaking out. I mean, I woke up all of a sudden and the doctors were sitting in front of me and saying, I'm so sorry, but unlike what we planned, which was non-invasive surgery, to just go through the growings up to the heart and replace the valve, we made a mistake and poked through the heart wall, and therefore we had to kind of get internal bleeding and we had to open me up very quickly and to save your life. I said, well, great, this is really great news. I mean, Jesus. So anyway, the bottom line is, that you cannot roll the clock back. It's a disaster. I was in the middle of a disaster. So now it's how do I get out of it? So you have to shift gears. You collect yourself, shift gears and say, okay, what I need to do now is I got to get out of this hospital, number one. How do I get out of the hospital is, okay, by getting out of bed and start walking. Start walking. First 10 steps, then over sit down around the nurse's station, and then long and long. And then I called my buddies in and I said, you guys have to fire me up. You have to count the amount of steps that I'm doing. And so this is what we did every day. Everyone came in there to the hospital and they said, okay, Arnold, get up now. Let's go and walk the hallway. So I'm walking down the hallway. Oh, you're doing really well. You're doing well. I knew I was not doing well. I looked like an idiot, wobbling around to the hallway. But I mean, the bottom line was I was getting going. And because the doctor said, you have to exercise your lungs because if you get pneumonia, you can die. So I wanted to get really going with the exercise, get out of the hospital as quickly as possible, and then get going with the training again. Because I had 3 months later, I started with Terminator 6. So I had to be in shape. I had to be able to move around, run around, lift things up, do the fight scenes, and all of this kind of thing. So we did it because I had a positive attitude. I knew exactly how I'm going to get there. I had the support system because none of this we can do by ourselves. I had a whole support system and it was fantastic. The way all the guys pumped me up and got me going. And when I started shooting Terminator 6, I was all back together again.
It's not a bad summary, is it? Not a bad summary at all. Now, some of you may wonder, do we really need a Terminator 6? But that's a different question. Different question. It turns out we have Terminator 7 here tonight. He's in the audience tonight. That's the Terminator 7 right there. Mr. Wright. The websites will give you anything you need. So tonight, so far, we've talked about heart events shake up people, the idea that special knowledge gives us some insights about life, and that's the fuel by which the rest can be done, and in particular, that coping matters. So let's look at what we ought to do about this. So what can we learn from all this? I've given you some high-level ideas, but let's actually look for some strategies from this. I'm going to suggest 4 areas of strategies tonight to consider. Talk about self-reflection, reconnection, taking actions, and giving thanks. Now, first, self-reflection, right? If only we had these, right? I mean, there'd be peace on earth, perhaps. You know, you would know to stay away from your wife, your husband, you know, like, now's not the time. You know, by the way, when you're a psychologist, your wife goes, and you're a psychologist! So that really, turns out, doesn't really work well at all, but that's nonetheless. So this idea here about how do we know how we're doing? And that really is a challenge. I have a Nissan Rogue, not a fancy car, but it has this thing called a check engine in it. Most of you probably have a similar thing. You know, all it says is check engine. Doesn't say where, doesn't give you really anything. But then they send me this report every now and then, and it's a health report on my car. I know I'm not sure how well it knows all these things, but it's the same idea that we know that our reliable pieces of transportation need these different kinds of things. But what if we had such a thing for us, right? You know, self-care tracker, took shower, that seems like a low bar, but ate nutritious food, moved my body, journaled, went outside, drank enough water, took 15 minutes for myself. I mean, what if we did some of those things? That the idea that perhaps we do need to check our mind in a similar way. Is there a checklist of things to make sure we're tuned up and make sure that we're doing the things we need to do? Because when you look at stress, for example, and you look at problems in our homes, problems with our family, emotional problems, spiritual, all these different physical symptoms, a lot of those are the kinds of things heart patients manage and deal with. We are going to be under stress. That is part of the adversity of living. And when our bodies respond to that, we have really only two mechanisms in our body. We have parasympathetic, which is a calming response, or sympathetic, which is an arousal response. And generally speaking, we think anxiety and stress are heightening the sympathetic, while the parasympathetic is teaching yourselves like Tai Chi that we heard about, or like yoga, or like prayer, or like relaxation training, or things that help us calm down. I don't know, maybe listening to Taylor Swift or whoever it is that calms you down. But it's all part of these processes to help you manage this relationship between arousal and relaxation. So managing stress, of course, and self-reflection is part of a tactic. Now, our special forces are, of course, trained not far from here, and our special forces have specific mindsets. And I think when you become a heart patient, it becomes really important that you think about your mindset. That are you here because you want to grow and embrace challenges, or do you want to just look skilled and flex on people and say, I don't need that cardiac rehab, you know, I got it all up here already. And it's very clear, they talk about special forces, that the people who make it through the toughest training, are people who keep their mind open and say, yep, I'm always learning. I'm not a fixed mindset. I'm learning, I'm changing, I'm growing. And this growth mindset's really important. Now, these are 2 performers who I want to just highlight for a minute, because they're both kind of interesting people in addition to interesting performers. Most of you would recognize that's Taylor Swift and, of course, Prince. Taylor Swift's first concert in the US on this new tour, it pours. And here she is, out in the rain. And her resilience as a performer means so much to people. That she didn't go out there and cry. She didn't go out there and say, I can't perform in this. I mean, this is not what I'm accustomed to. Take me back to the Ritz-Carlton. But the idea here is that there was a commitment to overcoming whatever's thrown at you. And it's similar in this Prince story when he was sang at the Super Bowl in Miami. You might remember that Prince has this Super Bowl 2007, and they said, Prince, we're really sorry. I mean, it's pouring, it's halftime. We don't know what we're going to do for you. I mean, it's just going to be pouring. Is there anything we can do? And he said, can you make it rain more? Can you make it rain more? Can you bring some more adversity? Because adversity brings out the best in me. And that's a way of flipping the idea that we're under threat and we're uncomfortable and simply saying the threats and this discomfort are actually what make me better. These are just examples. I mean, here's another one I love. Steph Curry, one of the greatest basketball shooters of all time. Probably Caitlin Clark's better. But the idea here is that fall in love with getting better. One of his teammates said, he's in love with getting better. He's in love with getting, I want to be that. I hope people say about me, the guy's in love with getting better. He wants to be better. He wants to be a better speaker. He wants to be more interesting, not so boring. He wants longer hair. You know, whatever it takes for me to be better. And I want you to have that, to want to feel a way in which you can be better at what you do, better because the threats that you've faced simply make you better. They shake you from demandedness. They shake you from entitlement. And they remind you that everything's freaking precious. What we have is something to be grateful for. And that's the growth mindset, very much so. And then finally, I think self-compassion. I think the idea here is all of us fall into these traps. All of us forget about the value and the importance of what we have sometimes. All of us do. And being compassionate means, how would you treat your friend in a situation? The classic is, you're like, somebody in my family recently needed to use a walker. And the person said, well, I don't want to use a walker. I mean, people will make fun of me. And I said, have you ever made fun of somebody in a walker? Other people are incredibly compassionate. But we often challenge ourselves or don't give ourselves much. So compassion is this idea of turning it inward. So the first tactic here is the idea that, can we self-reflect? What are we made of? How do we fall in love with getting better? How do we keep doing these things? I want to suggest that I think it comes to us from our connections. Even Arnold Schwarzenegger was saying how he had to get his friends in there to help him. And that the idea of reconnecting to our families, that having everybody on the team, most everybody who's a cardiac rehab patient is here tonight with somebody like that. And we didn't give you a t-shirt, but I guess we could have. We gave you chicken or something. What did we eat? We gave shrimp. We gave you shrimp and brownies. It's kind of better. And you guys remember the old show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? I always loved this idea of whether you had smart friends, right? Hey, I'm in trouble here. I need a smart friend, you know? Who are your lifelines? Who are the people you call on? I mean, this is where the connections go. And reminding yourself who's on the team. You know, research into social support, which is the idea of teammates, has consistently shown that we need 3 or more people who we could count on. Now, when I moved up to Greenville, I couldn't get 3 guys to help me get a couch out the door. 3 guys, let alone I'm going to call and go, hey, I'm stressed out here. That developing people that you can call on and count on is actually a long-term skill. And to be on the show, you had to have 5, for the record, to be on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. But the idea here is appreciating the team. You know, the Beatles were a pretty good team. They made a few records, didn't they? The Beatles are a pretty good team, and they had some pretty talented people. Now, there's John. He's got all of those instruments he plays. There's Paul. He's got all those things that he plays. There's George Harrison. That's got all those things to play. And there's Ringo. He got one thing. This is a postcard from Paul McCartney in 1969. That's important, right? Because that's near the end of the Beatles. Sent from Surrey. You are the greatest drummer in the world, Ringo. Really. Even Paul knew that Ringo's contribution mattered, even if it wasn't at the level of John Lennon or George Harrison. And certainly, here we are, still watching Paul McCartney at 80, touring the world. But it mattered. And he knew it. And realizing that who's on our team really does help us to recognize that our teams, there's a degree of self-reflection and there's a degree of connection. So doing, right? What actions do we need to take then? If actions are so important, what do we need to do? Because doing beats thinking. If you look at the psychology of helping people get healthier, we can do cheerleading and we can talk about, hey, you got to do this and it's really important and think positive and do that. And that is true. But if you got to get started, you got to start with actions. Actions matter more. Because when we take actions, we observe ourselves and our attitudes will follow through it. We have lots of data. My labs continue to look at accelerometers and activities that patients do. We have all kinds of sensors we can put on people now and figure out what they do all day and see how they get active again. Doing beats thinking every time. And so one of the challenges, what do you love to do? And it turns out when you ask people, hey, what do you love to do? What's quality of life mean to you? Many of them don't know. I'm going to suggest tonight that at least these 4 activities are things that I'd love for you to fill in. So first off, what's fun? What do you love to do? What's fun for you? We ask patients in my clinic all the time, hey, what do you love to do? What are we trying to restore? And they go, I don't know. You go, wait a second, we got 2 problems. You don't know what you love to do, and you're not doing them. So finding the things that you love to do. Like I love live concerts. As you might guess, I love live sports. I love live concerts. I don't care what's going on. As long as it's live and people are trying to perform under pressure, I love it. I love it. Before I'm getting ready to come up here, I feel it, man. I feel like, wow, I just love Broadway. It doesn't even matter what the play is. I just like seeing talented people try to deal with stress. I think that's really cool. I mean, this young lady's kind of doing that all over the world these days. I think that's a pretty special place. That's probably my most favorite place in the whole world. Happens 6 days a year. 6 days a year, Greenville, North Carolina, that has 100,000 people, gets 50,000 of them in this place. It's not about football to me. It's about this university. It's about this region. It's about the people that are out here even. That Eastern North Carolina and East Carolina matters. That we serve this state. We're here for this, for the people of this region. And that's why I love it. But there's also time and intimacy and recognizing, and I think more than anything, the most common reason men cry in my office is when they recognize how valuable and powerful their connections are with their families. Because work and life can distract you. And then suddenly when somebody says, it may not be here for you, they often feel it. That special knowledge comes around again, doesn't it? That valuing what you got, valuing what could have been lost. This is really important, and I think each generation of people are tying themselves tighter and tighter to that. I think being in awe, there's great evidence that awe has some calming effects. I mean, obviously, look at this place, right? Having a sense of awe. This happens to be me in front of the redwoods. My wife took that picture. I don't really know exactly what her thinking was here, but this is how important I might be. I don't know, but nonetheless, here we are, giant redwoods. I mean, they are awe-inspiring, right? This is probably my favorite venue in the world. I mean, I make a living educating people and giving lectures all around the world. And Jeanette's Pier may be the best one. I mean, also, I can talk about East Carolina a lot with y'all, and you don't mind. And finally, activities of peace. Whether it's self-reflection or connection, activities of peace matter. Finding ways to savor moments and to feel the calm in our lives still matters. Our phones, our TVs, everything can interrupt all that, but our activities of peace still matter. I think walking on the beach remains one of the most calming things I can do. We were sitting out here earlier kind of thinking about this beauty and listening to the waves. I mean, there's just some things that, secretly, winter out here might be better than summer. So quality of life means knowing and doing what you love to do, getting a hold of what you want to do, and working together with your medical team to overcome barriers, to get back into these things. Because there are very few things that we want to hold you back from. I can't hardly think of any. We want you to be re-engaged in life. The more engaged you are, the better you are physically, the better you are mentally. I mean, this is sort of like a bingo card. It's sort of silly, but look at all these different things you can do. You know, I skipped dessert. I don't know why don't fill that box. But these other ones kind of matter, right? Check your blood pressure. Started with fruits and vegetables. Just kind of things you can do every day to sort of be healthy. And I kind of talked about this a little bit much tonight because I'm kind of going through this in my own life and thinking about, what am I most thankful for? Raised kids and and healthy family, and thinking about giving thanks as a final strategy that I think our patients teach us. What are you grateful for? And really thinking about things as simple as hot coffee, hot showers, all the way out to being able to be in a beautiful spot that maybe you can't do every day. But finding specialness in the common aspects of life matters too. And what are you grateful for? There's data about this. Research in psychology has continued to try to figure out, why would gratitude be helpful to anyone? What is that? How can that be? How can being thankful affect one's mental health? And the data is actually pretty clear. If you look across this is a large systematic review. While doesn't mean you give up your medicines for those things, it certainly means that gratitude may be flipping some sort of switch in regard to health, that it's affecting these physical and psychological parameters. Michael J. Fox said it recently: if you don't think you have anything to be grateful for, keep looking, because you don't just receive optimism. You can't wait for things to be great and then be grateful for that. You got to behave in a way that promotes that. That same thing, that activity, that movement, that behavior, as opposed to waiting for gratitude to strike you by lightning. And research suggests that the way that gratitude probably helps us is that it flips the game. Rather than saying, this is what I've lost, this disease broke in and took from me, it says, wait a second, yeah, the disease took from me, but look what I still got. It's a way of flipping the script. And the data says that it's really about attentional bias, that what we look at, we see. So spending time thinking about, hey, I'm miserable and the world stinks, you will be able to find evidence for that. But you can also find evidence for, actually, I got some things that really matter. And there are things that are really good. It reminds me of this story about Mr. Rogers, where Mr. Rogers was always frightened by things he saw on TV, and his mom told him to look for the helpers, right? When I was a boy, I would see scary things in the news. My mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. Look, all of us can watch the news and get down. But there are people trying. There are people trying to help. This hospital is trying to help this community. All of the healthcare providers here are here tonight because they care about you achieving the kind of health that they would want for their family members. That's the nature of this. This is the common good of being grateful. And I think this idea of savoring, every year I live a little bit more reminiscing, a little bit more savoring, but still anticipating. One of the things I always talk with my mother about, who's 80 years old, I always say to her, hey, what are you looking forward to? I talk to her most days, and I'll say, hey, what are you looking forward to? And, she may say something as simple as like, well, I'm going to lunch, or I'm having my hair done or something. I don't have that problem. But she said, she's always going to get her hair done, or whatever she's doing, things with nails or whatever it is. But the reason I ask her that is I don't care what she's doing. I just want her to anticipate things. I want her looking ahead. I don't want her stuck about, an argument she had with my father who's deceased 25 years ago. That doesn't matter. I want her looking forward to tomorrow, and I want her looking forward to seeing my kids or her grandkids, and that anticipation really matters. I want to pay attention to where we are. We got something special here tonight. This is special. This doesn't happen much. Savoring what we have. It's all part of the process of what can heart patients teach us. Self-reflection, thinking about how do we fall in love with getting better? How do we look for adversity and welcome adversity, confront adversity? Because we can. You can. Reconnect, the people in our lives, Schwarzenegger's friends, our friends, taking actions, finding the things you love to do and pursuing them. And then finally recognizing, hey, even though there's some bad days out there, we got a lot to be thankful for, even now. And I'll stop with my favorite t-shirt. This is for patients with congenital heart disease. It says, they whispered to her, you can't withstand the storm. She whispered back, I am the freaking storm. Thanks very much.